I call this workshop to order. This is the workshop for the Inspector General Oversight Committee meeting. Today is November 1st, 2012. If we could have the clerk call the roll.
Commissioner Antonacci, Commissioner Archer, here. Commissioner Farag,
Here.
Commissioner Fiore,
Present.
Commissioner Gallo,
Here.
Commissioner Harbison,
Here.
Commissioner Howitt. Here.
Wonderful. It appears we have a quorum, so we'll go ahead and get started. Introductory comments. From our perspective, we have sign-up cards, which should be up there. In case anybody wants to comment, please fill one of these out and hand them up here to the dais, and we will take them up during the public comments section. Of course, if you have electronic devices, please turn those off or mute them, silence them, so that we don't get any interruptions. And
He was called out of town.
Mr.
caught up
Antonacci's out of
yeah.
town?
Yeah.
Okay. Hopefully he's not caught up in these snowstorms and everything else that's going on up there, and those problems. All right, let's go ahead and get started.
Is this an appropriate time to ask a question about the agenda?
Anytime's an appropriate time to ask that. Commissioner Fiore.
Thank you. I made a comment to the Inspector General's office about item 6. Since the purpose of this is a workshop to determine Inspector General renewal criteria, not really one of the meetings of the Inspector General Committee. So it has a different flavor to me, and I'm uncomfortable having on the agenda at which we talk about personnel evaluation the rollout of something that is celebratory or laudatory for the same office. So I'm wondering if it would be possible to adjourn before that and allow General Steckler to do her rollout immediately following the meeting.
Now, what is the feeling of the committee with regard to that issue?
Makes sense to me.
Commissioner Howard, Commissioner Harbison, Commissioner Archer and Gallo?
I'm agreeable.
Okay. Well, why don't we do that? That'll give the Inspector General an opportunity to discuss the website, but also stay consistent with the issues that we have here for today, which is a workshop. A little bit of background in terms of why we're here and what we're doing, and I'll let General Steckler and her folks also speak. One of the things that we have coming up is in 2014, the renewal of General Steckler's contract or non-renewal. Obviously, we have to examine at that particular point and see where we are historically, and this is for the benefit of the public because the folks on the Oversight Committee know this, who were there from the start. This is a unique position in the sense that it is, I don't know how best to describe it, either quasi-public or quasi-private, because General Steckler and the office are independent of county government, but yet are in some ways part of county government. When we did this process the first time, Mr. Merriman and Ms. Yan were very, very helpful in sorting through the process, sorting through, and I counted the other day, all 131 applications that we got for the position, and starting with some of the issues and things that we needed to do in order to select General Steckler, select an IG. But there was also some things that our committee, being in its infancy, couldn't really determine. For instance, we couldn't determine exactly what the office would be doing. A lot of it was we were learning as we went along because this was a completely new office, something we were creating from whole cloth. We also were not certain how we would judge or the criteria by which we would judge any person in that office because, again, we were creating it from whole cloth. And this office is unique in some aspects because often, as General Steckler I think would agree with me, many IGs are within a department or an agency, while this particular IG, by virtue of the way it was structured by the voters and by the county commission when it passed the ordinances, is somewhat inside, somewhat outside and the goal being obviously independence of the office. So it's a little bit of a unique situation, and in light of that, I felt, and I think the other members of the committee felt, that it would be appropriate to have a workshop. We can start talking some of these issues out in a public, transparent fashion, so the public, who is really the stakeholder with regard to this office and the work of the office, can have an input and have also a say as to how we develop the criteria. And also, obviously, since we're all governed by the sunshine on the committee, that we get a chance to talk about it, because I would like to hear my fellow committee persons' thoughts and ideas with regard to the particular office. So those are my introductory comments as to why we're here and what I thought we could accomplish. I like the fact, General Steckler, that we set this up very early. I like the fact that it's a transparent, completely transparent process. I like the fact that we have an ability to really establish what it is we're going to do and how we're going to sort of keep this office moving forward as we go along. So having said my initial comments, I don't know if anyone else has any other comments or thoughts or ideas? No? Well, having said that and having hogged the agenda for the last 5 minutes, General Steckler, if you could sort of give us your perspective on the office and what I guess we're calling contract deliverables, for lack of a better phrase, and sort of explain to us where you're at and what you'd like to do.
Okay, if I may, they're in your packet. I think it's in the back, actually. We just put this together quickly. There's 5 slides just to take us through. Very quickly, I'm going to take us through the 5 slides. I'm then going to ask David Baker to talk a little bit about the history of how this portion of the ordinance was drafted, and then I'm going to ask Brad Merriman to also kind of tell you what we've done so far to date.
Perhaps you would just introduce everyone who's sitting with you and behind you
Brad
for the
Merriman,
folks.
Assistant County Administrator for the county. David Baker, one of the major players in the ethics reform, and Joe Doucette is the Chief of Administration and Contract Oversight. And then behind me, I have Jeff Whaley, who is our IT end-all, do-all person. And Christy here is part of our administrative staff and support and does a whole bunch of other things. And then Rob is somewhere back here. Rob Beitler's here, the General Counsel, somewhere in the audience. Okay.
Thank you.
Again, just to kind of recap, today is really talking about a framework of how to make the future decision of whether to offer a renewal for an Inspector General, and really to kind of build consensus as to the approach of how you want to do that. Just to let you know that the contract itself ends in June 28th of 2014, which would mean 6 months prior is December 28th, 2013. So we do have plenty of time. That's the good part about this. At that point in time, no later than 6 months, you would need to make a decision of whether to offer a renewal, and then from there, whether the Inspector General would decide to stay or not. So it gives us enough time so that you have someone in place and there's not much time where there would not be an Inspector General in the office. The contract, I am by contract. NEIG will be by contract. The county, and Brad's going to kind of probably take you through this, the county has 4 contracts. And so the deliverables are actually in the contract, which we've given you a copy of a draft of kind of what that meant, is that the contract actually points to the ordinance. So the things that are required in the contract are required from the ordinance. And just to kind of give you a timeline, we meet again in February. We meet again in August. So we have 2 more meetings before we have to, before you all have to really start to put something in place, no later than, of course, December, but certainly you could talk about this and have it done in August. It's totally your call, but so you know timelines, you do have 2 more meetings that are going to be scheduled for our 6-month status report. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to David.
Thank you, Cheryl. I know most of you, and most of you know me. I've been involved, along with many of you, for 6 years in establishing the ethics initiative and going from where we were as a county and our culture 6 years ago to where we are today. And I think we've come an awfully long way. And for that, I'm very proud. I'm very proud that members of the public have stepped forward to serve with no remuneration on a committee that takes a tremendous amount of time. I have nothing but the utmost respect for what you do, what you have done, and what you'll do for the next few years. I certainly hope we don't lose any of you out of the need to get back to what you do to make a living. But I'm very proud of what we've been able to accomplish, and we've been able to accomplish that with some really, really high-quality people. When this effort started out, we came up with 3 guiding points of where we wanted to go. Those guiding points were independent oversight, really, but independence, transparency, and a strong code of ethics. With the help of the senior county leadership, Brad Merriman and Denise Neiman, and Lenny Berger and others, and of course the leaders of the initiative, we were able to put together a set of ordinances that the County Commission unanimously adopted, creating the Office of the Inspector General, creating the Ethics Commission, and approving and putting in place a very strong code of ethics, stronger than what the state of Florida has, and for that I'm very, very proud. I'm very proud and thankful that we were able to achieve that. Among the guiding principles that we started out with, none is really more important than the other, but there is one that seems to come up more often than the others, and that is independence. And frankly, as Commissioner Farage said, independence is what this is really all about. We created, the people who were involved in this process created a new way to oversee from a Inspector General perspective the conduct of local government. As far as I know, this pattern doesn't exist anywhere else in the country. It was a very well thought out, new but very well thought out pattern, and among the things that were considered when we went through this process was, well, you're going to create this extremely independent office. What are you going to do to ensure that the office is doing what it's supposed to do? So that is the reason the Inspector General Committee was established, to advise us, to advise the community, really, as it went through the process of hiring the first Inspector General and then reviewing the Inspector General's performance in the office and determining whether the job would be offered to the Inspector General for another term or whether another Inspector General would be sought. We did give that a lot of thought, and what we came up with was, as we say, the Inspector General Committee, which has had a couple of names, but I think Inspector General Committee is probably the best. And the basis for determining how to look at our Inspector General, since other Inspector General's offices are different. And that is, we set forth the responsibilities of the Inspector General in the original ordinance. The original ordinance was approved tacitly by the voters when we had the charter amendment adopted. There were extensive discussions implementing the charter amendment, and as part of those discussions, of course, were discussions of the Inspector General Committee, and that the performance, that what the Inspector General would be judged on was the performance of the office and the Inspector General with respect to the duties and responsibilities given to the Inspector General under the ordinance. So I think you have a very good starting point and you know, a fairly complete set of criteria to look at the Inspector General in determining whether that office is doing its job in the ordinances themselves. Again, I want to emphasize that this process is very, very important because it is critical, because of the independence of the office, that feedback be obtained from the community and from the cities and from the county on their perspective of the office's ability and the office's performance under the ordinance. But I think that's where you look to determine, is the Inspector General doing the job the Inspector General is supposed to be doing? And I'm obviously happy to answer any questions that you may have of me with respect to the background that we went through, and of course a lot of you went through it with me. So,
Any questions from the committee for Mr. Baker? I do have a question.
Sure.
I presume that the ordinance was drafted more from the perspective of minimum qualifications as opposed to really objectives of the oversight of the Inspector General.
Well, in terms of qualifications, I don't really think that's the issue. I mean, basically, you determine qualifications when you engage the Inspector General, and if the qualifications that were represented when the Inspector General took the job are consistently, or in fact the qualifications of the person, I think that's where qualifications comes in. The real question, though, Commissioner, is whether or not the ordinance sets out what when you talk about objectives, you're talking about very specific, what did you do this year?
Well, and then it's a bad question on my part, Mr. Baker. Apologize. I'll give you an example. I took a look at the Green Book, and that sets forth, as General Steckler knows, the criteria by which other Inspector Generals try to look at each other's offices and try to determine, for lack of a better phrase, best practices, I guess. And none of those seem to be, or most of those don't seem to be incorporated into the ordinance. And I can see a very good drafting reason for that. The reason being is that you want to actually sort of set forth what an Inspector General does and what they should be, but you also don't want to perhaps tie the hands of an oversight committee or even come to a decision at that particular point early on in the process whether these criteria, say the Green Book criteria, are the appropriate ones to use for oversight.
Well, one thing to understand is that the office, I'm sure we're all aware that the office has been accredited now, so it certainly follows, it's part of its mission, its direction, its overriding values is to follow the rules and regulations, the mutually agreed rules and regulations of publications like the Green Book. So, yes, it would have been, I guess, unnecessary to set out that sort of thing in the ordinance. But and yes, the performance of the performance that is reviewed should be performance that's consistent with the Green Book.
Okay, and that was my bad way of asking the question whether we were limited in any fashion by the statute, the ordinance, or whether there were other methods or criteria. I got the impression from reading the ordinance that the Oversight Committee would not be limited by just what's set forth in the ordinance itself, but could take into account other factors.
Well, I think by definition, there are other factors that might enter into it, because in order to, when you get the feedback as to performance, that feedback may affect your view of performance. I think one of the critical things, and I don't mean to get off your question, Commissioner, but one of the critical things is, as you said, the independence of the office. And it's the Inspector General, by its nature, as our internal auditors, are subject to a fair degree of criticism by people that they audit and inspect. And that's natural. That's just part of the process. And it's the tough job of the commissioners, the commission, to differentiate between criticism, fair criticism, and criticism that a person is doing the job they're supposed to do. And I think
That's well said. Obviously, there's a difference between fair criticism and the fact that no one likes having someone else look over their shoulder.
No one likes to have someone else look over their shoulder. And that's what this office was created to do, as our Inspector General says, to shine the light where it needs to be shown.
Okay. Commissioner Harbison?
I'm reminded by congressional testimony by the commissioner of the IRS once when they were under fire, and he made no apologies for the fact that their mandate was to collect taxes, and when you take money from people, it upsets them. So I understand that, right? I may be getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but I would ask you whether you envision these criteria to be largely objective criteria based on the ordinance and based on the Green Book and those types of valuation benchmarks. I have to believe that at some point there's going to be some subjective. At the end of the day, I suppose the criteria is what the seven of us decided it is, but how the job is carried out, there's no question in my mind, but that you've created a very qualified staff. It's exemplary in every regard, I think, in terms of the infrastructure you've created. But beyond that, I guess we will look at how the job is carried out and what the results are, both on an objective basis and a subjective basis. Does that comport with what you all see?
Commissioner, if you're, Mr. Farage, you're chair, so may I speak again?
Of course.
In general, Commissioner Harbison, yes, but I think it is, again, important. I mean, your example couldn't have been more on the money than the office is going to be criticized for doing its job. Mm-hmm. It is just a natural fallout of that. And the problem with subjective considerations is you get into the I guess it's generally known as he said, she said. You get into you potentially get into too much of that. And I think the objective, my thoughts throughout this process of helping others in the county create the framework for the office was that the decisions with respect to the hiring and review and termination of the Inspector General would be, for the most part, very objective.
Mr. Chair?
Commissioner Fiore?
So continuing along that line, what I think we can reasonably do is look at processes. And so, yes, we'll have complaints about the Inspector General. We have complaints about the Commission on Ethics. How do we handle them? What do we do? What's our response? What's our process for dealing with complaints about internal operations? Do we change procedures? Do we, file them in the round file? What's our process? So even though the critiques that we get may be very subjective, I don't think we can address the actual content of them as much as we can look at what the outcome of that was if the complaint was made to the Inspector General's office. So in my view, I'm not really sure about this yet. That's why we're having the workshop. But if we were to solicit municipalities and county about their interactions with the Inspector General, I would then want the Inspector General to tell us, and we responded thus and so. In other words, just the fact of the complaint, to me, would not be a fair way of looking at the office. So I do want to know that stuff eventually, and that's not in your deliverables. So part of my worry about using just the contract deliverables is it doesn't get to genuine achievement for me. It is, for example, General Steckler, told us that she would make a paperless office. So I want to know how that went. To me, that was a very important consideration. There were other things about the accreditation. So obviously you have accredited your office. They're doing just an extraordinary job in terms of professional development, that sort of thing. So those sorts of things are not exactly in your contract deliverables. And so part of what we're going to have to do is decide how we interweave those high standards, if you will, that we expect from the office with the minimum required by the contract. And again, this is what the purpose of the workshop is, so I'll stop there.
There's no need to stop, Commissioner Fiore.
That's
Okay. Commissioner Archer, Commissioner Gallo, any thoughts or comments thus far? And obviously, General Steckler, we've got other folks who are also going to speak, correct?
I concur with what's been said to this point. So.
Commissioner Gallo? I have nothing to add at this time. Commissioner Howard?
Well, I actually am thinking about this and maybe need to hear from Mr. Merriman first, but I have a question for Mr. Baker with regards to the comment about the process being whether the office is doing its job. And this is what I have been thinking about ever since reading the deliverables, and I think it's a little bit of what Commissioner Fiore is saying. Is that the analysis? Or would that be the analysis for purposes of determining whether termination was appropriate in terms of if the office isn't doing its job, well, that's something we should address as part of a removal, neglect of duty or whatever. And while I think that, and this goes to, I think, the sort of, the contract deliverables are so concrete that it really just seems to be contract compliance rather than maybe the 4-year review of sort of quality and certainly, no comment about anything, but is there somebody who would do it better? Is there something that could be done better in this position rather than just we're doing what we were told we had to do? Is that the analysis, or is the analysis at this point, not this point, next year's point, more a sort of quality assessment? Since I do think, the founding fathers of this process really did a remarkable job.
I think there were some founding sisters
Yes.
as well.
Yes. I know there were.
Understood.
I know there were. But it is an evolving process, right, in terms of, I think it should be, as we see how it works, what works better, what is, better for what the ultimate mission of having an IG is. And so, this may be appropriate for the general discussion about what we do, but it did raise a question in terms of your comments about the analysis being whether the office is doing its job. And do you see it as sort of that concrete, or do you see it as any broader than that?
May I comment,
please.
Mr. Brock? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. First of all, I think the circumstances for termination of the Inspector General are specifically set out in the ordinance, and it's a little bit different. It would require some misdeeds and incompetence and negligence by the office.
Yes.
And I don't, the decision to renew or not renew the contract certainly would be based on those criteria as well as the other criteria considered in the responsibilities of the office. Those are certainly minimum levels of performance. When you look at the other elements of the ordinance, I think it is fair to consider the level of compliance of the office with those. Is it, and I've never been a big fan of circle number 1, 2, 3, or 4. I don't really think that's an effective way to make an objective judgment. certainly numerically efficient, but it's not very helpful in determining whether the person is really doing their job. But I think you will look at each of those elements of the performance and say this office is doing a great job, or this office is doing an okay job. The question I think you're asking, Commissioner, is if we came up with the Inspector General is doing an okay job on everything, does that mean we have to renew or offer a new contract? And I think, of course not. I don't think that's the case. You're looking for high-performing offices and high-performing people. It's just where you go looking for that information. I mean, you're going to get a lot of feedback, as you should. I mean, again, I emphasize that this process is essential. The review process is essential to the commitment that we've made to the voters of Palm Beach County that we'll have an effective office. That's really where we need to be going, is we've made that commitment to the public. The commission will be judging the office as to whether or not we're doing what we promised the public would do.
Okay, thanks.
Any further comments from the committee itself? Commissioner Harbison?
My only last comment would be that it seems to me that anyone that has anything to add, positive or negative, to this process clearly should be here to make a public comment about it. I mean, I personally will make my own evaluation based on my skill sets as a forensic accountant and what I know about this process and what I've learned from being involved in it since its inception. But I certainly would like to hear from the public, and so if anyone's watching, I would say that those people who have something to say about it ought to be here.
Mr. Fiore?
I would also like to mention that we do hear from the public with every Inspector General report. So every one of them has a letter from the person that you have interacted with saying either we agree with you and we'll take care of it, or in between the lines, we don't like you very much. I mean, so it depends on what you get. But we have those responses, and I actually pay more attention to those than I do to your actual findings, because I trust you on the findings. What I'm looking for is what the response is of the person. Have you been helpful to them, or in fact, are they defensive and not willing to work with you? So I'm a little concerned when I hear feedback, because it sounds like we will now go out and solicit feedback, and I surely don't want to get into that mire. I'm quite happy to have feedback that arrives, but clearly people with a problem will be the ones mostly, giving feedback. So I think, I want to make those responses to your activities a very high, give them a very high level of weight, because I think those are professional responses. Personal responses is a whole other thing. But we would, if we are actually going to solicit public feedback, we have a lot of talking to do about that. So that's an issue for me.
Commissioner Archer.
I'm not sure we want to solicit public feedback. I think we get a large amount of public feedback without having to solicit it. My concern is that we as commissioners have the opportunity for constructive feedback to the office, and I don't see that in the evaluation per the contract. I think it needs to go a little further than that, that's all. But I'm not suggesting that we do public solicitation for comments. I think we all get those throughout our time, and certainly the office does. So that was my only comment.
General Steckler, you've heard some comments back from the committee, obviously. The Sunshine Law is in effect, so we haven't spoken to each other about our individual views and thoughts and comments and so forth. So we're hearing this for the first time from other folks as well. So this is all constructive, and obviously this is the purpose of the workshop. But I do note that you do have other folks that do want to speak, and we've sort of taken you a little bit off topic. I hope our comments back to you and to the office have been helpful in terms of what some of us are looking for, but I do want to give you the opportunity to continue down the path of the presentation. Mr. Merriman, are you next?
Apparently I am.
Okay.
Good morning. For the benefit of our newer committee members, I'd just like to take a moment to tell you who I am and why I'm here. Still trying to figure that one out. I'm Brad Merriman, Assistant County Administrator, and I've been, I think, an integral part of the process that in the development of all the ethics reforms and initiatives. I was the county administrator's designee in the development of the entire process. I participated in the development of the ordinance, the ballot language for the municipalities and the charter change. I assisted the county attorney's office in negotiating the inspector general's contract, which she still holds against me, but we won't talk about that. And kind of been the county's point person all along. Worked with the committee in the advertisement and the development of the criteria for the hiring of the inspector general. I'm the former human resources director for the county, and the human resources department still reports to me. So with that background, our task, my task to assist the general was to give you some sort of framework to work with and to develop some sort of performance rating instrument. And I can tell you from my experience of over 30 years here with the county that the development of any type of instrument is more of an art than a science. And I agree with Mr. Baker that I've never been a fan of checking off the 1 through 5 boxes. And I can also tell you that with our other 3 contractual employees, the county administrator, the county attorney, and the internal auditor, there is no formal rating process. I think you will find that throughout governments, not just in the state of Florida, but nationwide. Our county administrator, who sits right over here, any given Tuesday, serves at the pleasure of the Board of County Commissioners. The executive employees of the county, such as myself, serve at the pleasure of the county administrator, don't have an employment contract. So I may walk back up to my office at the conclusion of this presentation, be out the door. Probably won't happen, but you never know. So you're taking on an interesting and daunting task, and the overlay of that is as we've discussed at length for the last 45 minutes, is the independence of the Inspector General. Other Inspector Generals, such as in Miami-Dade County, report to the Board of County Commissioners. It's not the case here. Our Inspector General reports to the people through the Inspector General Committee. So having any kind of qualitative or quantitative instrument is a daunting task, and I think you all are right on point with most of everything that you've said. We tried to provide you with a framework and a starting point of something to use. I would encourage the inclusion of some level of public comment, whether you solicit it or receive it ad hoc is not necessarily important, just to take that into consideration, because I do believe you'll hear public comments that are positive as well as possibly ones that are negative, and those are all important parts of the review process. What we tried to do is to take, as has been discussed, the elements of the ordinance and the contract that are quantitative in the deliverables and include them as being those are the elements of performance. Perhaps one thing that you might want to consider is under each of those include what you might call a comment section, so that instead of just doing a completed yes/no, that can be included, but also some qualitative or quantitative comments that might go towards those issues that could be gleaned not just from the observation of the committee, but the participation of the public. These are just ideas I'm throwing out there from my years of trying to do this. So that's what we came up with and what our rationale was, and I think it's perhaps, again, a good starting point.
Any questions for Mr. Merriman from the members of the committee?
Could you say a little bit more, please, about how other contract employees are evaluated? You said they did not have a formal evaluation.
They do not.
So they just keep working until someone tells them to stop?
Something like that. yeah.
Okay.
Usually what happens in municipal government is the city manager shows up on Tuesday or Wednesday night and somebody says something, and I'm not being facetious, and sometimes they see it coming and sometimes they don't, and there's a vote, and the next day the city manager is gone. Our county administrator and county attorney have been here for a very long time and have an outstanding record and work relationship, but in other counties, not so much, and in a lot of cities, sometimes it just happens very quickly.
What about merit raises? How does that happen if there's no evaluative instrument?
In our county, we haven't had pure merit increases in a very long time. We haven't had any increases in, I think we're going on the 4th year due to the economic situation. And our county administrator, our 3 contract employees, in their contract, it basically says they get whatever the general county employees get, which, again, has recently been 0, but in years past, an across-the-board raise has gone from anywhere from 2.5% to 5%.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions for Mr. Merriman by the members of the committee? General Steckler, does that conclude your presentation, or do you have other folks that you think would be helpful for us to hear from?
I think it's a good starting point.
Okay. Commissioner Howard.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask General Steckler if she sees some benefit to her work or her office from this process.
Well, there's always a benefit, because that's how you grow, and you will continue to grow this office. And the comments are well taken. I think there's a caution, too, has been discussed, that this office is designed to hold government accountable, and it's not always going to be well received. And even with the comments, sometimes there are negative comments, but they do the right thing, and they implement the recommendation. And really, at the end of the day, that's what it's about. It's about improving government. And so somehow you have to balance that with, are we moving forward with ethics reform? Do the people feel more comfortable in the trust of their government? And it's hard to measure, and it's hard to do. We're putting things in place to hopefully do that. But typically in an IG world, it's based on your deliverables, which is your annual report. Many, many inspector generals are, they don't have a formal process because people are not in our office. As a boss-subordinate relationship is easy to evaluate. We evaluate in our office. But when you're not in that office every day, it becomes hard. So you have to rely on the deliverables. And that's why I think we all decided to start with what was expected of this office, by those that created the ordinance, by the people that put this in place. So very important, because at the end of the day, you need to know whether it's me or somebody else, and I like to take me in this process of that part, it's really about the future of this office and ensuring that it continues to move forward, what your expectations are. But a lot of it is in the contract. It's that ordinance. It's putting in place and moving it forward for ethics reform.
Commissioner Howard, does that answer
Yes.
your questions? All right. Commissioner Archer, yes, please.
Do you have annual objectives or 4-year objectives?
We have a strategic plan that's out there. It will always grow because this is a new office, but yes, we have a strategic plan out there, and we have objectives for each of the staff or the units as to what we expect. We set those out. Sometimes they'll change. For example, a timeliness factor. What we see sometimes is delays by others that put that timeliness factor not in the fault of the employee. So they're adjustable and they change at times. But we do have some set format and protocols and performance measures for the office, yes.
Are those made known to the public?
The strategic plan's out there on the website.
Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
And then, of course, the 6-month status reports. Those put out all the activities, all that, the annual reports, all on the website.
Right.
Cheryl, excuse me, why don't you also mention the feedback group that you've created in the county? I think that's critical to the measurement of performance of the office.
Well, we have a couple groups. One, of course, is the Business Stakeholders Group, which we will actually be meeting with them at the end of this month, which helps us with the business community and the education community. We have lots of members on that committee to help us move the office forward and the expectations from the private sector, from the public view. We have a Citizens Initiative group that we train as well as to educate them on the process of council and commissions. And they in turn provide good feedback. You all provide good feedback. We like to say that we take a lot of your feedback back and we make our changes. So all the input we take in and we hear and listen from the community.
So any citizen in Palm Beach County that of a mind to could attend your training session?
Absolutely, and several are here today.
Okay, good. I knew that, but I just wanted to make sure everyone else did.
Call our office.
All right, General Steckler, do you have other prepared comments, or?
Not at this time. I mean, I think it's great that we're doing this early because it's important. You know, when I first got here, a lot of people said, who's watching you? And we put the standards in place. We put accreditation in place because that's important. Those peer reviews are important. Those are professionals in the profession that can hold this office, to say whether it's meeting those standards or not. They're every 3 years. It's very, very important. And as you know, I added that, and the drafting committee agreed to put that in the ordinance because that tells the people as well as the government that we're just not out there on a whim. We're following standards. And if we don't pass our accreditation and we don't pass our peer reviews, then that's a gauge for you all. Then there's a problem there. Or is it a simple thing or is it a large thing? That's a good tool for you all if the office doesn't get reaccredited, if the office doesn't pass a peer review. Those are people in the profession that understand what's expected.
Okay. This is the portion of the agenda, 5A, where we ask for public comments. I have received one public comment card. If anyone else wants to publicly comment, if you could come up at this particular time and speak. Ms. Matkevich? Sandy? Okay. If you'd like to speak first. I'm sorry?
I would have rather been third or fourth.
Okay. Well, if you could go ahead and state your name and your address for
Yes,
the...
it's Sandy Matkevich. I'm from West Palm Beach, Florida. West Palm. I'm nervous, so please bear with me.
Take your time and just have a conversation with us.
Okay. I've heard you mention complaints against the Inspector General's office. I don't know of any tax-paying citizen that voted for this office has any complaints. It seems that complaints are coming from officials elected. They don't want her looking over their shoulder. If I was in office, if I was working for the city and I wasn't doing my job, I don't want her looking over my shoulder. The Inspector General's office and you people sitting up here, the Ethics Commission, that's all we have to
Let me interrupt you for just a second because I want to make sure that we make sure everybody understands that this is not the Ethics Commission here today. This is the
I'm aware of
Oversight
that.
Committee.
Okay. What I'm saying is
okay, good.
You're what we have to fall back on to keep people honest, get them doing the right thing. When politicians are nervous, the Inspector General's doing her job. The City of West Palm Beach has an internal auditor who was forced from office after 22 years. Her committee, the Auditors Committee, resigned. There's 2 women left in the office to do the job. One is a fairly young woman, just had a stroke. there's one person in the audit department looking over the money for the city of West Palm Beach. The city initiated a lawsuit against the Inspector General. One purpose, make her go away. I think this meeting is about her contract. Am I correct on that?
Technically not. This is about creating criteria
Okay.
for the office. We're not really technically evaluating Inspector General Steckler today, but we need to. This is a workshop so that we can figure out what are appropriate criteria for evaluating the office as a whole.
Well, I think she's done, a hell of a good job with what she's had to work with in the amount of time she's been here. My hope is that she doesn't get disgusted enough to say, I resign, I'm going away. That, to me, would, to thousands of people, that would be devastating. Thanks for listening to me.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Santa Maria, you also put in a card. Would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you. Let me start by saying I have been a Palm Beach County resident for 38 years. I'll be going in my 39th year. So I've been around quite a little bit of time. And I believe I've been pretty active in the community over those years. In the early 80s, I was a co-founder of Citizens for Open Government in the Wellington Royal Palm Beach area. It's a pretty active group, and it was kind of a watchdog organization watching over government. So it's this concept of Inspector General, of course, was of much interest to me because that's something I've been involved in over the past 30-plus years. When a national magazine labeled Palm Beach County Corruption County, that got me a little bit unsettled and concerned. And I felt, although I was really quite a bit reluctant to be politically involved, I did not like the title Corruption County. So in 2006, much against my family's feelings, I decided I would see if I could show a different type of public service and decided to run for office. So in 2006, I ran and won as a Palm Beach County Commissioner. Soon after that, Michael McAuliffe was also elected state attorney for Palm Beach County. And I presume he heard of my activities and my concerns in the county. So he contacted me and asked if I would volunteer to testify in front of the grand jury regarding public corruption. And of course, I accepted the invitation to volunteer. And I did volunteer and testified in front of the grand jury. In fact, I think the referee at that time was Alan Johnson, who kind of was the person who organized the grand jury with Michael McAuliffe. And anyway, I was very pleased actually with the report of the grand jury. I believe it was in the summer of 2009. I was very anxious to get the Office of Inspector General started. And it was very clear in that grand jury report that the objective was to follow something similar to Miami-Dade. And Miami-Dade's concept was to have an independent Office of Inspector General to be funded by 0.25% of vendor fees. In other words, it was not supposed to be funded by the taxpayer, and that pleased me a lot because I felt it was important that, number one, the Office of Inspector General was 100% independent, and number two, to help make it independent, it not be funded by the taxpayer, but rather by the community, the vendors, by vendor contracts. So anyway, that was then presented before the county commissioners, of which I was one. And one of the things that kept coming up again and again was the issue of independence. And that was critical. The public showed up at multiple meetings, and that was the main objective of the public, and my objective, that the Office of Inspector be truly 100% independent. In fact, I have monthly meetings. I've actually had monthly meetings even before I was a commissioner with my community to discuss different public issues. And on this issue of Inspector General, there were again two things that were repeated and publicized in our local papers in the Western communities: was independence and funding by the vendor contracts. So eventually, we voted. We, the county commissioners, voted, and we unanimously agreed with the idea that it be truly independent after the repeated urgings of the public, that it be independent and that it be funded by vendor contracts. I have seen various areas of attempts to make the Office of Inspector General difficult. Different areas of the public and the government have presented obstacles. The first obstacle was the definition of fraud, definition of waste, the definition of management, inefficient management. So that was the first series of attempts by certain factors, in particular certain municipalities. And of course, I must again emphasize, as a result of the publication of independence and the funding by the vendors, by vendor fees, the referendum in 2010 was clearly, the mandate showed very clearly that 72%, over 72% of all 38 municipalities demanded the installation of the Office of Inspector General that was truly independent, and the public was, I feel, was made to understand that it was going to be funded by vendor fees. Shortly thereafter, again, there was this opposition by certain municipalities to create obstacles, starting with the definition of fraud, or definition of waste, and the definition of management efficiency. We overcame that after, again, numerous public hearings. We overcame that, and we did away with the definitions. But I I saw another cloud coming up when the issue of the funding came up, although we unanimously voted 7-0 that the funding be by vendor fees. We said, well, it came about that it was going to be expensive for the billing system to change the billing system and deduct that 0.25%, because it was going to cost us $500,000. The commission, to facilitate the processing of the funding of the Inspector General, the commission decided to put off the deduction from vendor fees and charge the general fund. I myself was quite disturbed by that, because I felt that that was going to create now a potential obstacle, because now the public was going to, was told, as far as I was concerned, the public was made to understand that it was not going to be paid by them, but now passing it on to the general fund, in fact, the taxpayer now is going to be funding. And exactly what I was expecting has happened today. It started with 15 municipalities filing a lawsuit against the county, not wanting to pay the fee through the general fund. And I still, in the county commissioners, I again brought up the issue. That's not what the grand jury recommended, and that's not what we approved. We must go back to charging the vendors the 0.25%. And again, after numerous meetings and the outcry of the public again said, yes, charge the vendors. So we again voted a second time, 7-0, to go back to the original intent, which is charging the vendors. And it was supposed to be effective of October 1st of this year. So we should be charging by now with the second 7-0 vote by the county commissioners. And yet I still fail to understand why up to today, we're still charging the taxpayer for the Office of Inspector General.
Commissioner Santa Maria, with regard to a very narrow issue that we're here today, the issue of the criteria by which we should adopt, or even whether we should adopt criteria, I know you've been very instrumental in the entire process. What is your opinion, being one of the folks who actually voted for the ordinance at the county commission?
My opinion is basically that the Office of Inspector General really is unable to perform. The criteria is meaningless because of all of the obstacles presented by all of these different areas of opposition. The Office of Inspector General will not be able to do its job. So we're wasting our time because unless she gets true independence and unless she gets the proper funding, it's a waste of time. We're really wasting our time, and we got to follow the mandate of the people. It's my opinion, both as a citizen and as a member of the Palm Beach County Commission, that we are in fact not following the will of the people.
Commissioner Santa Maria, before you go, I sense that at least one commissioner would like to ask you a question if we can, because obviously you were very involved in the process from the very start. And other than Mr. Baker and perhaps Mr. Merriman, you probably know more about this process than anyone here in the room. So, Commissioner Harbison.
Yes, thank you for speaking, Commissioner. I appreciate your candor. I have two questions. One, to your knowledge, has anyone ever looked into the validity of the estimated implementation fee of $500,000 that you referred to in terms of the software and billing mechanisms designed to process those vendor contracts. That number's been batted about, but I've never heard any discussion as to whether the methodology in arriving at that number was questioned, or whether that was just accepted and passed on because it was so high. And then the second question, it's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that when asked to provide the list of vendors from the 38 municipalities, that they couldn't provide it, that they didn't even have their own list of who their vendors were, which at some point, seemingly rendered that methodology ineffective. So do you know anything about either of those matters?
On the $500,000, I don't think it was questioned. So
that number is never vetted by anyone in the community or in government.
As far as I know, I don't know how the figure was arrived at, and it was not questioned. I'm sure Brad Merriman will be able to answer that.
Okay. Mr. Merriman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, that number came from our clerk's office. As many of you are probably aware, the structure of county government, unlike cities, is that the county has, by Florida Constitution, it's set up so that the county doesn't really pay its own bills. The clerk of the court, the clerk and comptroller, is responsible for that. And the interface between the vendors and the county at the financial end is the clerk. And the clerk, being the responsible party for collecting the money and paying the bills, is the one that gave us that number.
I realize that,
for the modification. So we didn't really have any way to either challenge that or verify it, or we did accept that because that's her responsibility. The second question about the cities not having a handle on their vendors, that may be indeed the case, and just by way of a little bit more of expansion on the concerns that Commissioner Santa Maria expressed, it was the county's intent to move towards the 0.25%, and then the complication of the expense from the clerk's office, but the more overriding complication was the lawsuit filed by the cities, who challenged the entire funding structure. And upon advice of counsel, we were advised to just put a hold on everything until that lawsuit is concluded and those issues get resolved. It will be our intent to move towards the 0.25% as long as all those legal issues are resolved satisfactorily.
And is it also correct to view that $500,000 figure as a one-time implementation fee?
That's my understanding.
Does that answer your questions, Commissioner Harbison? Commissioner Howard, did you have a question? Commissioner Santa Maria, I know you're very, very busy, and we really appreciate your taking the time to come here and talk to us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
My final statement is, as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing more important in Palm Beach County than to put the Office of Inspector General doing her job the way it's meant to be. And there's really nothing more. To regain public trust is critically important because the public has lost public trust, and the only way we're going to regain it is through an effective working Office of Inspector General.
Thank you again, Commissioner. Ms. Finney, Debbie Finney.
Debbie Finney, West Palm Beach. I just want to make two comments. I support the funding, the continued funding of the Inspector General's office. I think the overseeing is very much needed. And prior to them coming online, I didn't have any place to go that was independent of the city of West Palm Beach. And the other thing I'd like to say is, I've lost confidence, some confidence in the Palm Beach County Ethics Commission after the ruling on the Comcast cable and Commissioner Kimberly Mitchell issue. I just lost confidence there. So, and just like Commissioner Jess Santa Maria said, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done to get the Inspector General's office up and running like it should be, and maybe some critiquing in the Commission on Ethics Department either after the Commissioner Mitchell and Comcast cable. I just don't understand it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Finney. Ms. Scheibel?
Good morning, Commissioners. Some of you know that I, too, was involved with David and several other groups from fairly early in the process on the ordinances, the independents. We've got a lot of grassroots folks who worked on that as well. What I'd like to home in, though, on evaluation perspective is something that both Commissioner Harbison and Dr. Fiore mentioned in terms of a watched group. The watched people do not like being watched. And I attend enough of the county commission meetings as well as my own city's meetings to say that they have a large platform and they take every opportunity, prefaced always by I support the Inspector General or the Office of Inspector General, and then take their opportunity to blast the Office of the Inspector General to the public wherever they can. And so taking the evaluations, I believe in what Dr. Fiore said. You can look at the letters and see the anger in them, yet if they implement it, that is key, because they will come kicking and screaming, which was exactly what we expected and why we wanted the independence. They will complain about the cost. They will try and attribute the cost to the Inspector General instead of attributing it to the fact that they weren't doing something the way it should be done. Not talking about the lawsuit, I'm just talking about they are able to use a political platform, and it is political, to try and destroy an office where they will continue to express their support. And so really when you take the public comment meaning those being watched, into consideration, you have to be really wary about where their motivation is coming from. And they will always find an opportunity to say that this is not in our best interest, we're already doing it, we already have an internal auditor, we already have this, we already have that. Why are you looking at it? You're duplicating time, and it's not a fresh look, it's not sunshine, and so you've really got to consider, if you open it up and say, let anyone comment, you're going to get some interesting comments. Meanwhile, those same organizations are trying to do whatever they can to stamp down on whistleblowers, to stamp down on the ability of their employees to go and bring forward complaints to the Inspector General. And so there are two forces at work, all being done by those being watched. And I think you have to somehow find a way to weed through that and get to the facts. Thank you.
Any questions from the committee on to Ms. Scheibel? Thank you, Ms. Scheibel. Mr. McCullough?
Paul McCullough, West Palm Beach. You know, I've been involved in law enforcement when I was on the highway patrol. I never met anybody or gave anybody a ticket that just said, "Hey, Paul, thanks. I appreciate that." I am all for the Inspector General's office, and I'm just, you know, we're getting kind of a mixed signal of things. One is that Cheryl is trying to do the right job underfunded. And I think that will have a lot to do if you tried to make an appraisal now as to whether the office was effective or not. Because you can't be effective if you don't have the personnel to be effective. And like she said, some things get backlogged, and as I spoke to her this morning about an issue that I had sent them. We need to have a gut reaction to whether Cheryl's doing a good job. It doesn't have to be written on paper because a lot of people don't articulate their real, what they think and what they can actually say on paper. I used to interview a lot of salesmen when I was in business, and I had a sign on my desk that I would turn over when they came in the office to be interviewed. And we'd go through the interview process about an hour or whatever it happened to take, and then when we were finished, I'd turn the sign back over, and I'd say, "Read that to me, please." And the sign simply said, "If you understood what I said, please explain it to me." Because what I speak and what you hear can be two entirely different things. And this is why I think that it needs to be more of a personal appraisal of overall office, not just Cheryl. She's the leader of the pack, and naturally you go after the big dog first. But the fact is that you've got to evaluate the whole thing, evaluate the fact that it's underfunded, evaluate the fact that we've still got people that sit on the Ethics Commission, not you guys, but the other guys that do the hearing, that refuse to recuse themselves when they have an infinitesimal relationship with the accused person that's being heard. And as my card said, I would like to see the Ethics Commission have, like jurors do, 2 alternates, 3 alternates, where you can get these people that are sitting there, and in the case of this Kimberly Mitchell thing...
Mr. McCullough, not to cut you off, but we're here as the IG Oversight Committee, and then I'll let people speak as much as they want, but I want to make sure that folks don't get misunderstood between the IG Oversight Committee, which is one committee which is completely independent and separate than the Ethics Commission. I'm sure the Ethics Commission would be happy to hear you talk about that particular issue.
Oh, I bet they would.
And they're meeting today here at 1:30, so we can see you then.
Cool.
But I hate to cut you off.
No, that's cool.
I do want to stay focused on the issue of what is the appropriate criteria for evaluating the office of Inspector General, because that's the purpose of today's workshop.
Well, I'll go back and say that my feeling about the appropriate criteria would be that you folks that are sensible, reasonable, and not involved in the punitive side or the chastising side be the ones that make a gut reaction and not answer yes and no questions like David said, 1 through 5 and stuff like that. That it has to be a kind of a gut reaction. You know, are we really getting what we're doing, and are we accomplishing what we meant to?
Thank you, Mr. McCullough.
Appreciate it.
Ms. Hogan? Nancy Hogan? There you are.
Older and a little more slower.
It's quite all right. Please state your name and address for the record.
Yes, I'm Nancy Hogan, 37 Hibiscus Way, Ocean Ridge. I just wanted to briefly say, well, let me just give you a couple of credentials for background. I am a real estate broker, licensed real estate broker here, very active in it and with the Board of Realtors, but I'm here speaking on my own. I am a CPA, and I have a master's in public administration, public finance. And I did serve on Ned Regan, the New York State Comptroller's staff for auditing municipalities. And so what I just want to briefly say, the process of audit, whether financial or efficiency, is most important. It's not only as a necessary oversight function, but also an important check and balance. Function like our legislature, judicial, and executive. And let me just repeat that. It not only is a necessary oversight function, but also an important checks and balance function like our legislature, judicial, and executive federal balances. I'm not going to go into the public corruption occurrences in this county the past 10 years here. Frankly, I, all my friends, and decent, loyal citizens of this country are disgusted, tired, totally worn out by what has occurred in this country, in this county, and continuing to occur during this national campaign. Continuing with the Inspector General's contract is not only a no-brainer, but an important base of good government opportunity to thrive. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hogan. I'm sorry, before you go, Commissioner Harbison does have a question.
Okay.
I think you might be just the right person for this question.
Don't put me on the spot here.
What do you see as a distinction between internal audit function, internal government audit function, and that of the role of the Inspector General? It's been my view that the role of the Inspector General does not overlap with the internal audit function or the county or city auditors. They're there to do what they've always done. I make distinctions in terms of the role of Inspector General in terms of contract oversight, forensic examinations, things that obviously overlap perhaps in some regard, but are distinctly different than a day-to-day audit function that exists in government. Do you understand my question, or do you have an opinion on that?
You know, I haven't worked on a day-to-day function with the Inspector General, and so I think it's creating itself. But as an auditor of municipalities and love of getting the efficiency out of every dollar that an American works for in order to give to the government to help those who need help, as you go from a federal level to a state level to a county level to a local level municipality, it's very difficult. These are your neighbors. These are people that you go to church with. It makes it much more harder in the audit function and for fairness to continue on a daily basis, because the mayor's been in there for 10 years. He knows John next door, knows his kids, and so to have an internal audit function is very, very important, without a doubt. Every administrator, especially a county administrator, should love to have that. But you need desperately, as you move down that governmental line, to have an individual body that is not connected, that is independent, that has an opportunity to come in and say, as I did, talk to my manager on the phone, town manager on the phone. I said, you know, I had a tough conversation with the staff yesterday, but, you know, sometimes we got to say difficult things. It's not that we want to put somebody down, but we all got to learn from each other. But to having that independent person that you can go to. I've sat with the ladies who have volunteered at the training from Ms. Steckler, and it's wonderful how excited they are, because they go to meetings, they care about their individual municipality, and yet they feel like they're not being heard, and they don't have all the facts. When can I speak up? When can I speak up? And Ms. Steckler is really providing that service.
Is it, in your estimation, appropriate or inappropriate for a municipality to say, well, we don't need our internal auditors anymore now because we have an Inspector General?
No, but, you know, you can look at efficiency of the dollar again. Maybe there are some things that you can alleviate from an internal auditor that would appropriately be more with Ms. Steckler's staff, and you might be able to shift economic reality there, or dollars that be more efficient for everybody. But the independence is critical, critical, and helpful to all of us.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Hogan. Mr. Radcliffe?
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for this opportunity. I, like Mr. Merriman, I serve at the pleasure of a board, 18 people. And if I say the wrong thing here, it's bye-bye, Richard. That's the way it works. I would like to speak to the issue of why we're here. Why we're here is actually the process. And what's the process we're going to follow? And I agree with Paul. This is a great starting point. This is a really good starting point, but I would like my evaluation to be yes and no answers. I'm going to work on that this year. But I think we have an opportunity here. And with all due respect, we have to stop saying the C word. I believe we are the most ethically progressive county in the United States. Ethically progressive county. Not C county, ethically progressive county. And I'm here to just challenge you. I know each one of you individually. I've watched you do your jobs. You're all creative. You're all opinionated. You're very thoughtful, well-intentioned. I'm going to leave out a couple of the other ones. But you have a track record. And I am challenging you to do this, to rise above, because what we talked about here is all part of what's happening. But let's have this system get better. Let's have whatever process that we're going to follow, you are the ones in charge. You create it, and let this be the benchmark for the rest of the country. You have to do an evaluation, and like we said, and like Mr. Merriman said, sometimes it's almost invisible. But I don't think it has to be that way. And I think we have what I like is the variability and the diversity of the groups sitting up there. And quite frankly, I'm challenging you, because I think we're all at the base of something very great that's happening in Palm Beach County. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Radcliffe. I have no further public comment cards. If someone does want to make a public comment, please fill one out and come on up. Not hearing of any. I think we're on to the next item of the agenda, is the committee discussion itself. And for purposes of discussion, I'll open it up. I think this is a good start where we're at. And I think we challenged Mr. Merriman in his office with this task, because this is such a unique position. It's semi-private, semi-public, and also part of a three-legged process, a three-legged stool, as we've called it in the past, between the IG's office, the Ethics Commission, the State Attorney's Office, and all part of a public initiative which was started by folks like Mr. Baker and Ms. Scheibel and others, that worked its way up into the public process itself with people like Commissioner Santa Maria. So I guess what we have is, for lack of a better phrase, an omelet, and an effective one thus far. But the point is how do we look at the office in a fashion that continues the process of public transparency, accountability, and effective government. For lack of a better way of saying this, I like the standards that are set forth in the Green Book. And I'm saying this for purposes of discussion amongst the committee members, because I want to hear what they have to say. Those set out identifiable standards. General Steckler is familiar with those standards. Anyone who is an IG is familiar with those particular standards. And they're a good way of sort of determining what the office does and how it does it. I like the fact, obviously, that the office is accredited. That's wonderful. It's fantastic. It's where we need to be. And kudos to General Steckler and her office for receiving accreditation in apparently record time. But the citizens of Palm Beach County tasked this particular committee with perhaps going a step further than just accreditation. I think they want us to make our own independent investigation and make our own independent determination as to what makes for an effective office. And the question is not General Steckler. The question is, what is an effective office? And for that reason, and starting out at the objective standard, which I think with Mr. Merriman's, if I can sort of grasp what you were trying to accomplish here, other than trying to pick up mercury in your hands, very difficult task, you were trying to quantify this omelet into somewhat of an objective criteria. And I think you did a very good job where we are right now. But I think if we start to add the criteria, the additional criteria that we have, and just not in the contract or the ordinance, with the tasks, functions, processes that the IG offices throughout the country adhere to, I think that's a good start. We can start there. And From my perspective, that's where I think I would like to begin. One of the items I think we need to actually encompass into any review would be performance under the contract, which would completely dovetail with the criteria that Mr. Merriman has put together. Because I think you focused on the contract itself. But beyond that, I think there does need to be a public comment function. And when I say public comment, I mean all public. I would like, for lack of a better phrase, a 360-degree review of the office. I think folks such as Ms. Scheibel, Mr. Thompson, whoever wants to comment on the function of the office should be permitted to do so. Likewise, those folks who are, and granted, you have to take this with a grain of salt, those folks who are being reviewed by the office, I'd like to see those comments. Also, I think Commissioner Fiore is very astute in the fact that she reads those comments, and one of the areas that she specifically reviews of the reports are the comments, because obviously the criteria is a starting point, and General Steckler recognizes this, but the feedback and the performance are what all of us, including General Steckler, are all truly trying to look at and trying to achieve. So from my perspective, I think we've got a great starting spot with the deliverables that Mr. Merriman put together. I'd like to see us expand that into other areas where inspectors general are typically reviewed. I would like to see a public comment function incorporated, because I like everyone on the committee, speaks to a lot of people, but we don't speak to everybody. And there are people that we miss, and every bit of public comment that we can get, I would like to see. So having used up my 5 minutes and perhaps a little bit more, I'll turn it over to the other members of the committee to see if they have any comments, and I'll turn to my right this time. Commissioner Fiore, any thoughts?
Too many. First, I think we need, as a committee, to decide, are we reviewing the Inspector General office or are we reviewing the Inspector General? Because we're using those interchangeably, and that's not, I think, what we're supposed to do. If I understood correctly, we are targeting the Inspector General, not, although her activity in her office is part of the review, we're not going to be assessing whether her office is acting up to Green Book standards, for example. That's already been externally addressed. So as long as we're very focused on criteria for reviewing an Inspector General, whoever he or she might be at whatever time here or later, is what we have to get to. So I appreciate the deliverables as the first leg of that stool, if you will. I'm thinking of this in threes. So that's one very specific thing. We can certainly assess those deliverables. I presume the strategic plan is connected very closely to those contract deliverables, that they are actually fleshing out what the deliverables are. So if we take those deliverables and the strategic plan as one part of the stool, we have both the ordinance language and we have the Inspector General's understanding of what the ordinance requires her to do. The second piece of that is the accreditation report, which I think we ought to review in fairly good detail, because that is an external expert opinion, if you will, on the activities of the office vis-a-vis your evaluation. And that's in effect as if we had an Inspector General sitting on this committee telling us, look at this, don't look at this, look at this. So it tells us what sorts of things matter. The third piece is the feedback piece. And I think that's really important. I absolutely agree with Chairman Farach that we have to find a way to be inclusive about feedback. And I don't want to actually solicit via survey or any of that sort of thing, but to make it possible easily for people to give feedback. And so maybe it's allow people to give comments on a computer site, that the Inspector General review period is open from here to there, and if you'd like to leave a comment, this is the place to do it. We'd have to figure out how we actually look at those comments, but something of that nature would be fine with me. Obviously, there are citizens groups involved. We need to talk to them. I'm thrilled that citizens are being empowered to take these ideas out and use them, that we're not just committees who act in public fora, but we actually are empowering citizens. And I'd like to know more about that because I think that's a really important element. I agree totally with Richard that we are progressing and that we should think of ourselves as on a path, and we have very good direction and we have actual accomplishments and are forward going. We look back to remind ourselves of why we do this, to motivate ourselves. But the motivation ultimately has to become intrinsic. It has to be being good for good's sake, not because we don't like the write-up in Forbes or whatever it turns out to be our motivation is. So we really want people to take this on as a project of civic culture, if you will, not a reaction to a bad patch or even a very long bad patch. So I'm very interested in public feedback. We'll have to figure out a mechanism for that that's fair and that's appropriate. I have thoughts on that which we can discuss at a later point. But what we're looking for ultimately is evidence that we have an effective mechanism that moves the change forward, that what we're doing actually promotes good ethical practice. And so when I look at what the Inspector General is doing, the deliverables don't move me. What moves me is that I can see that the practices in the municipalities or in the contractors or in the county are actually changing, that people are taking the advice and correcting problems in their own house and owning those changes. That's really what we have to get to. Ultimately, we'd like the Commission and the Inspector General to be out of business. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Fiore. Commissioner Archer?
Yes, except for the last sentence, what she said.
Commissioner Gallo.
And good morning. I looked at this deliverables, and I think they're pretty good basis. And certain sections give us the opportunity to expand on what we need to do. For example, I think I need my glasses. 2-4232 talks about conducting or investigating or evaluating your work very objectively. And I guess we have the audits. We have the Green Book, which I'm really not well versed in, so I'm going to bypass on that. But we also have your accreditations, and I think those are really good. Another criteria I think is good, I think it's already been discussed, is the responses your reviews of the city or county's practices are getting, such as people are acknowledging, we thought we were doing it right, but we'll concede. I mean, that's a real good one there, because I do think most people in government do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. I think there are a few that don't, but and that's why we're here, but I think the vast majority do. I think that really is the core of where you're successful, is how you can take people who really think they're doing well but aren't necessarily doing what you think need to be done and kind to divert them or direct them in such a way. Kind of like the word public trust came out. There are going to be people who are just going to fight you. We all know that, and we can pretty much dismiss that. But people who are in adversarial positions all the time recognize that just because you disagree with the person across the table doesn't mean there aren't standards of behavior and conduct that we expect, and that in the end of the day, hopefully the right thing will happen when the day is done. And I think it's more than just getting that done, but also conveying to the community that that's how we're approaching it. It's the public trust is as much an appearance as it is a reality. So it's going to come down. So when we look at these, my perception of what we are doing here today is trying to give you those guidelines that we think need to be done. And it is the objective criteria of being an Inspector General. And those are pretty outlined. You have your accreditations. We can look at the responses the people you investigate and see how well they take to your direction. But there's also perception that people have that, yeah, she's hard, but she's fair, versus she's just hard to be a troublemaker. I don't see that at all. And I like to use an objective criteria. I don't have it right now. I'm thinking about it. But I think that's what we need to do. We have to somehow give it an objective definition of how you can create that public trust, and what you're doing is accomplishing things. A, you're bringing out that people really are doing a good job, and B, we're all welcome to improvement, and we are making those improvements. I don't know how you define that, just throwing that out right now. Today's been a very good learning experience for me as well. I've learned a lot today, and I'm appreciative of that. And so from my infancy here to you, this is what I see. It's as much appearance as it is the truth. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Commissioner Gallo. Commissioner Harbison or Commissioner Howard?
It's interesting. I am hoping I don't have to read the Green Book, just for what it's worth.
Commissioner Steckler, for the benefit of those folks, will you explain what the Green Book is?
It sets out standards from, due professional care, staff qualifications. It sets out a varied amount of standards that an Inspector General should take and their office should take when they conduct an investigation. The audit side actually points to the Yellow Book in the Green Book, and then there's evaluations sections. So we have red, we have yellow, we have green. We have lots of different standards.
Flashing yellow signs.
Well,
and it's put together by the Association of Inspectors General, the nationwide organization.
Correct. Yeah. Well, I still hope I don't have to read it, or the Yellow Book, or any other book, because I do think the issue is, I think we get tempted to go down the road of evaluating sort of ultimately the success of the ethics initiative, and that isn't the road we're supposed to go down. I think that's a great road somebody needs to go down, because that is bigger than just the IG. I think, as Commissioner Fiore said, really our task is to make a determination about renewing the contract with General Steckler. And so it's pretty specific as to that. I think that the deliverables are important in that they are evidence of, or, evidence of, they're evidence of her leadership or her lack of leadership. And so I think that's one aspect of this process, but there are other parts of it. I think that the deliverables are those things that we can sort of say yes or no, although I really do think there are, I liked Mr. Baker's language of level of compliance, that there are differences within the deliverables that are worth commenting on. But there are also, I think, other things that, going back to when we sort of started the process with hiring, what we were looking for and what we thought would be important, some of which I'm not sure does translate into the deliverables. So I think it is going to take this committee a little longer to think more about some of those criteria. I do think it is important to get feedback, mostly because I fortunately have not had any contact with the IG's office. No, I mean, in terms of, I think we need to know. But I don't think it ought to be just a come in and, vent or say your piece. I think we ought to structure some sort of specific questions. What is it we want to know from those who have, whether it is, come under the scrutiny, have obtained advice, have filed complaints? What is it we would want to know from them to evaluate General Steckler? And I think we can kind of rein that in so that it isn't just sort of a public forum on what would turn out to be, I think, a public forum on the ethics initiative as a whole. I think, as a very good thing, this county is going to have an IG office, no matter what we do. And I think that's a good thing. We're not here to say we should or we shouldn't. We're here to say, General Steckler, we would like you to stay, or we'd like to find somebody else. That's really what this purpose is. But I would like to have the feedback from very specific groups, from business, from government, from citizens, and as I say, in a format that's of value to us, not just an opportunity to kind of vent, but in a format that's of value to us to educate us on making that the ultimate decision as to General Steckler. And then I think in this process, you know, I was thinking about the issue of how funding restrictions may have an impact. And at some point in this process, obviously, I think we need to hear from the general, if there are issues, that how that has impacted or whatever. I think the nice thing about the timing is that since we don't have to undertake this for a year, maybe there will be a little more stability in some of those issues, but we'll see. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Howard. Well, did you have an additional comment, Mr. Harbison?
I do, thank you.
Sorry.
I know I've been talking a lot already, but first of all, I'd like to say that what I believe we were looking for when we went through the hiring process, we got, and I think no one would dispute the competency of General Steckler or her staff, or her commitment to what she is her chosen profession. She was just reelected to the board of the National Association. I understand if that's correct. So her commitment to what her profession goes beyond her 9 to 5 or 9 to 11 or 7 to 11, whatever your week looks like. So I think we've got that in place, and I agree with everything everyone else has said. But I think short of having a public forum, which I personally think is a fine idea, to take a look at the whole ethics initiative, because that's what this process is going to come down to at some point. I think that all these criteria that we're talking about, which I agree with, and our purpose here in keeping it between the lines, you know, in terms of the scope, it's going to drift outside of those lines because there's no other place to talk about it unless we do it in our annual or quarterly meetings or semi-annual meetings. Based on the feedback that I get, and I think it's apparent to a lot of people, there's a number of subplots that are always in the running. Many people that I've talked to believe the lawsuit is completely disingenuous as to funding, but rather that it's just a way to knock the legs out of something, accountability system that people don't want to deal with. I guess everyone can make up their own mind about whether those arguments are genuine. But one of the reasons I think that the public comment is good, and some of those people who may be your stated enemy, it'll give us a chance, and the public, a chance to ferret out some of those arguments. And because right now, no one has the ability to respond, to ask questions of, or make inquiries of the motivations or the content of those arguments. And so I'm perfectly capable of making up my own mind. I don't need to be influenced, but I'd like to have an opportunity to talk to them if they would come before this commission to voice their complaints about the way you do your job or your qualifications or whatever it is. I'd frankly like to hear from them. Because unless there's another forum in which you can do that, because I think that there's a lot of sneaking around in the shadows, frankly, in terms of attempts to undermine not only, well, primarily the Inspector General's office. I don't really feel that on the Ethics Commission side so much. But at the end of the day, I agree with the other commissioners that largely the evaluation is going to be on some of the things we've already discussed. But I do think that the gut reaction approach, or the what I call a subjective approach, is there's still going to be an element of that in there. And we all have common goals, and we're here to maintain public trust. And at the end of the day, that's what really counts.
General Steckler, you've heard 6 individual versions of what constitutes the omelet, for lack of a better phrase. And obviously, Mr. Doucette, Mr. Baker, Mr. Merriman, you've also heard that. Having heard the comments of the committee, I think it might be helpful for the committee if perhaps the 4 of you, or if you want to task individual members of this committee to help you, try to come up with a framework. Obviously, we can't work in conjunction with each other, absent a public meeting or workshop such as this, but I'd be happy to help in whatever fashion. I'm sure other members of the committee would also be happy to help, so long as we don't work together and violate the sunshine. But I think we can get a good start, a good idea of what the committee's looking for in terms of evaluation of the office. I'd like to say again that I don't think there's any equivocation whatsoever from any member of the committee that the ethics initiative is not moving forward. It is moving forward, no question, period, end of discussion. And it's just a question of how do we continue what we've accomplished so far in so little time and keep that going down the road. And that's the only issue, only question I have in my mind is just how do we get there?
Do we need staff?
The question for me is how do we get public comment, and what form should that take? In other words, everyone can read all of the materials that are posted, but we're going to have to think about that method or process. So maybe the citizens group or the business group could help. I don't know.
Well, maybe we'll try to work on a survey or something.
Yeah,
maybe chomp on that a little.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Merriman, yes.
There are lots of different ways that can occur. I heard a comment about the possibility of doing some sort of web-based communication. We in the county do that all the time. We do. Okay. We are set up for that. The structure of it is where the rubber meets the road, how you ask the question,
right,
et cetera. But
maybe you could help us think
if
about
I may, I would be happy to work if the group so chooses Commissioner Harbison or Commissioner Farag to be the point person to work with us. I can set that up, and we can work through some of these issues, and then bring back to you the benefits of our work product at the next meeting.
Mr. Merriman, reach out to whomever you think is best suited for the particular task that you're thinking of. Because,
I'm very close to retirement, so getting closer every minute.
My point is that by intention, the committee is set up with 7 very separate, distinct, diverse individuals for the point of all of us bringing different diverse viewpoints and backgrounds to the task. So whomever of us you think is most appropriate, please ask us.
Well, what I would like to do at this point with your concurrence is to take the comments that you've made, work with at least one of the committee members with our work group, develop another version to bring back to the committee, and this is sausage. We'll continue to grind through it. It's not pretty, but at the end of the day, we'll probably have a product that is pretty darn good.
Commissioner Harbison?
I was just going to ask the commission whether it's appropriate that we consider, do we need staff to process or to help us on a day-to-day basis, and if we needed any sort of staff support, where that would come from. Would it come from perhaps you detailing someone from HR or some other part of the county? I know we've worked with people from HR at the inception, but as they were sort of detailed to this endeavor, I just envision at some point in the future as this progresses that we might need a few hours a week, not more, from a staff regard.
in further benefit of the public who may not know this, the IG Oversight Committee has no staff, has zero staff.
Or executive director or anything else.
We are just a committee, and in the past, Mr. Merriman and Palm Beach County government have been very kind to us and have assisted us in many fashions. So I guess the question, Mr. Merriman, is how do we tackle Commissioner Harbison's concern?
I believe we can work through the county's HR group if that's satisfactory to you to continue that process.
Commissioner Harbison?
I don't have an opinion on it. I raised the question is all.
Okay.
And if so, I mean, if we had we always call you, I suppose, but maybe
Maybe he'll be
if
retired.
you don't want us to do that, just tell us who to call.
You call me.
Okay.
Yes.
Commissioner Fiore, comment?
Only just to make it clear that we don't want to use Inspector General staff for this project. So that's why we're asking Mr. Merriman. And we have no
that's
staff,
perfect.
yes. So,
Other than the IG herself.
correct.
The point being independence of the review process from the
As
party
much as
being
we
reviewed.
can. As
Right.
much as we can.
Right. Having taken several attempts at unscrambling the omelet, I think we may have given you all an idea of where we are. If you have any questions for us, we're happy to try to answer them. Otherwise, if the committee members have no further comments or questions or thoughts, I propose that we adjourn 20 minutes early.
Did we get through the agenda appropriately?
I'm going to do the web after you adjourn.
Beg pardon?
I'll do the web after you adjourn.
Okay,
if you'd
very
like to
good.
stay.
No further comments.
Any other further comments or questions or thoughts from the committee? If none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion made by Commissioner Arthur, seconded by Commissioner Fiore, passed unanimously. We are concluded. Thank you very much, y'all.
Thank you.